and his teams. You can use books as well to just and a box of matches, you know, to make it fit onto the screen. That Journal of Economics, those copies that Jake has is for that. I think that's nice. No. Take it more to the right, Mzu. More to the right. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That will work. That will work. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Now we can start. It's 2 o'clock, 1 minute past, Mzu.
Looks like the camera might be stalling.
Yeah.
Or their connection. Should I kick it off then?
I just want to know if they are connected.
Yes.
Just give me a second. On one of the computers, at least. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, we are connected. We're just having a slight problem with the network here today at Rhodes.
Okay, all right. But your computer is working perfectly fine. So I think, yeah. So start everything from your side, Mzu, and then hand over to Sam.
All right. Am I audible? Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We've got some guests in the house today. Thank you so much for coming to our seminar. Right now, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sam Sadian, who's our moderator. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks a lot, Mzo. Okay, so yeah, good afternoon to everybody, and thanks very much for coming here and joining us this afternoon. So before we begin, just please do note that the recordings are going to be, the proceedings are going to be recorded, and they'll be made available on the ISER YouTube channel and across the other ISER social media platforms. Then just a little background on the ISER before we get started. So we have 4 key research areas, and they include environmental resources management, cross-border trade in Africa, skills development and education research, and then lastly also human and economic development. And that's where today's discussion is going to fall into. So I'm going to leave most of the speaking up to our guests, and all I'm going to do is very briefly say a few words just to set the scene. We're here in anticipation of Youth Day on June the 16th. You'll all be aware of why we observe it on that day and of the need to keep the memory of that day alive. But as a living memory, it also does invite us to think about what it means to think and to act politically in today's South Africa as well. And the most interesting answer to that question, arguably, does depend most on what the young people around us ultimately make of it, and in direct relation to their own lived experiences. And of course, it also depends on new and old ways of articulating these experiences and of voicing political demands in a social and an economic world that in some ways continues to change, but in other ways also remains very much the same, and perhaps too much the same. So that's what we hope to better understand today. And with that in mind, let me please introduce our special guest speaker, Ms. Asafika Mpako. Ms. Asafika Mpako is the Communications Coordinator for Southern Africa at Afrobarometer. Previously, she worked at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation on enhancing democracy, governance, and human rights in Africa. Her professional and academic experiences span 4 continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. She holds a bachelor's degree from UCT and master's degrees from Peking University and from the London School of Economics. She's featured on the global list of 2023 Women of the Future, 50 Rising Stars in ESG, and is also a recipient of the Mandela Washington Fellowship. Then we're also lucky to have Prof. Nomalanga Mkhize with us as a respondent. And Prof. Mkhize is a historian and a community development practitioner. She holds an MA in history from Rhodes University and a PhD in sociology from the University of Cape Town. She is a history professor at Nelson Mandela University and was a Sam Moyo postdoctoral fellowship recipient at Rhodes University. She's currently the director of the School of Governmental and Social Sciences at the Nelson Mandela University. So a heartfelt thank you to Ms. Mpako and to Prof. Mkhize for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. And then just before we kick off, let me just say how the seminar will work. So Ms. Mpako will present for about 25 minutes. Then that will be followed by a response from Prof. Mkhize for about 10 minutes. After that, we'll have time for questions and comments. So for those who are joining us online, just please post your questions in the chat box throughout the discussions, and then we'll attend to them right at the end of the presentations. And for those who are at ISER in person, feel free to share your questions with us during the question and answer session at the end. Okay, and then without further delay, it's my privilege to hand over to Ms. Mpako. Just unmute, please.
Thank you so much, Sam. And good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone in the room and those joining us online. As has been said, my name is Asafika Mpako. I'm the Communications Coordinator for Southern Africa for Afrobarometer. And it's a real delight for me to be in Makhanda today. I am pleased to be in my home province of the Eastern Cape. They always say there's no place like home, so I'm very happy to be here. This is a very special province for me, and Rhodes University is also a very special university to me because Rhodes University funded my studies abroad. And in fact, Prof. Nomalanga Mkhize, who is our respondent today, sat on the panel that interviewed me for the Patrick and Flanagan Margaret Scholarship. So I'm very happy to be here. So today I'll be sharing with you some of Afrobarometer's findings on youth priorities and political participation on the continent. Afrobarometer works across the African continent. And so I'm going to be giving you a continental overview. And then at some points, I'm going to be zoning in to the South African case. So let's get straight into it. So at a glance, what is it that our findings show us? First, we see that unemployment is the youth's biggest problem. Second, we find that young Africans are dissatisfied with how their governments have performed on their top priority of unemployment. And then third, our survey findings suggest that African youth have room to expand their influence through political and civic engagement.
Sorry, Asafika, sorry to disturb you. Can I ask if
No
Mzu can share the main screen, not the one that you are facing, because we are seeing your screen. We would like to see the screen on the wall, if you can share that one as opposed to this one. So share second screen, please.
All right, just give us a minute, Prof.
Okay. Otherwise, we can share on your behalf if there's a problem.
All right, no problem. Is this fine now?
No, you need to share the other screen. No, there are two screens. This one is the one that is for the presenter, and then the one for the audience does not have double screens. So we need the one that is on the wall that is just one screen. So currently you are sharing screen number 1 or screen number 2. You need to go select the other one.
Okay.
Okay, sorry to disturb you, Asafika, but we can also just share the presentation if that's easier.
All right, I think that would also be easier.
Okay. Am I sharing now?
Yes, you are sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you will tell me when to move. Let me see. Okay, I think you are here. Asafika, you tell me which slide, and then you just tell me when to move.
All right, Prof.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is fine, so we can go ahead.
Okay.
So for the benefit of those in the audience who may be unfamiliar with Afrobarometer, I just want to start off by giving a brief overview. So Afrobarometer is a pan-African nonpartisan survey research network that provides reliable data on African experiences and evaluations of democracy, governance, and quality of life. The organization has been in existence since the year 1999, so for 25 years now. And to date, we have conducted surveys in up to 42 countries across the continent. And we are currently in field busy carrying out the 10th round of surveys and disseminating on those findings. And why do we do the work that we do? Well, our goal is simple, and that is to make citizen voice a key pillar of policy and decision-making on the continent. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Should I move to the one on Africa?
Okay. All right. So this image shows you where Afrobarometer works on the continent. So you'll notice that the countries highlighted.
Let's project Zoom.
Yes, let me do that. Sorry, one more second. Should project now.
Perfect, yeah. No, you were sharing the right one.
All right, please go to the presentation then, Prof.
Or should I? Okay. Am I sharing now?
Yes, you are sharing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we can continue then. I'll continue with the slides.
I'm just trying to make this move away now.
Okay, now you're the one sharing, not me. Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
So now you are sharing on your side. Okay, fantastic.
All right. So this map shows. No worries, no worries. This map shows where Afrobarometer works on the continent. So you'll see that the countries highlighted in red show where we first conducted our surveys between the years 1999 to 2001. And some of these countries include South Africa, Lesotho, Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Nigeria, Ghana, etc. Most recently, we added Angola to our list of countries in 2019, and we also added the Seychelles in 2022. Briefly on our methodology, we use nationally representative samples of adult citizens, so those aged 18 and above. We conduct our interviews face-to-face and in the language of the respondent's choice. We also use a standard questionnaire that allows for comparisons across countries and over time, and our sample sizes range from 1,200 to 2,400 citizens, which yields country-level results with margins of sampling area of between 2 to 3 percentage points. So let's get into the findings. We'll start first with education and employment status. So here we find first that unemployment tops the list of most important problems that young Africans want their government to address. Second, we find that on average, African youth aged 18 to 35 are more educated than their elders. But despite this, they are considerably more likely than their elders to be out of work and looking for a job. So in our questionnaire, we ask our respondents, in your opinion, what are the most important problems facing this country that government should address? And across the 39 countries that we surveyed on the continent between 2021 and 2023, we found that unemployment tops the list, cited by 37% of youth aged 18 to 35 as one of their top 3 priorities. In second place is management of the economy. Third place is health. Fourth place, water supply. Fifth place, infrastructure and roads. And you'll notice from this list that young people don't differ much when compared to their elders in terms of what is a priority for governments to solve. So now we look across the countries and we see that the average, when we asked Africans what is most pressing to them and they expressed that it was unemployment, the average across the 39 countries was 37%. And if we look at the very top of the list, we find that South Africa features as one of the top countries where young people say that unemployment is the most important problem. So in South Africa, we find that 54% of young people cite unemployment as the most important problem. Let's move now to education level. So here we see that youth aged 18 to 35 are more educated than their elders. We see that close to 2/3, that's 64%, have either a secondary or post-secondary education. And this is compared to about 52% of those aged 36 to 45 years and 45% of those aged 46 to 55 years, and only about 35% of those, 35% of those aged 56 years and above. And then in terms of our unemployment rate, we see that 4 in 10 young people aged 18 to 35 across 38 countries on the continent express that they are not employed and they are looking for work. This is compared to 31% of those aged 36 to 45 years, 24% of those aged 46 to 55 years, and 14% of those aged 56 years and above. What's interesting is that 33%, a third of youth aged 18 to 35 say that they are not employed, but also that they are not looking for work. In South Africa, we talk a lot about discouraged work seekers, and perhaps we can try to unpack what this means, having a number of young people who say that they are not employed, but also that they are not looking for work. So of those who say they are not employed and not looking for work, 9% of those are students. But what about the rest? What could explain why they are unemployed and not looking? So now let's zone into the country-specific context. When we look at South Africa, we find that close to half, that's 47% of young people aged 18 to 35 are not employed and looking for work, compared to 35% of those aged 36 to 55 years and 10% of those aged 56 years and above. We also asked our respondents about their personal living conditions. So in general, how would you describe your personal living conditions? And here we find that young people, similar to their elders, are not very enthusiastic about their personal living conditions. Again, close to half, 45% of young people rate their personal living conditions as either very bad or fairly bad. And this is compared to 44% of those aged 36 to 55 years and 47% of those aged 56 years and above. Let's turn now to evaluation of government performance. Here we find that on average across the 39 countries that we surveyed, only 2 in 10 citizens, that's 20%, say their government is doing fairly well or very well on job creation. In South Africa, we find that only about 1 in 10 young people give the government a passing grade on its efforts to solve their priorities. We also find, in addition, that only small minorities of young respondents approve of the job performance of President Cyril Ramaphosa, their provincial premier, their local government councillor, and their member of parliament. I should also note here that the findings that I'm presenting to you on the South Africa case were gathered in 2022, late 2022. So I must make clear that this was before the election. So if we look across the countries that we surveyed, we find that only 2 in 10, that's 2 in 10 Africans say that they are happy with the performance of their government on job creation. South Africa, if you look at the very bottom of the list, appears in one of the countries where citizens are least satisfied with their government's performance on job creation. So only about 9%, that's about 1 in 10 South Africans, say that they are happy with how government is performing on job creation. And this is looking at the entire population and not just young people. So if we look at the priorities of young people in South Africa, they include at the top of the list, unemployment. Second is crime and security. Third is electricity. Fourth is fighting corruption. And fifth is water supply. And on these priorities, young people express significant dissatisfaction with government's performance. As you can see from the graph, only about 1 in 10 young people are happy with government's performance on creating jobs, reducing crime, providing electricity, and fighting corruption. Young people are only slightly more likely than their elders to say that government is doing a good job of providing water. And I should note here that electricity and water supply did not feature on the agenda of top priorities for South Africans at all in our last survey in 2021. But in our previous survey in 2022, these issues have bumped up the list of priorities for South Africans. We also asked our respondents about the performance of their elected leaders. And as you can see from the graph, only about 3 in 10 young people, 29%, are happy with the performance of their president, Cyril Ramaphosa. They are even more dissatisfied with the performance of their member of parliament, the premier of their province, and their elected government councillor. We also ask our respondents about country direction. So would you say that your country is going in the wrong direction or going in the right direction? And here we find that young people, those aged 18 to 35, are not happy with the direction that their country is taking. So in the South African case, we find that 81%, if you look at the very top of the list, 81% of young people say that the country is going in the wrong direction. Let's turn now to political and civic engagement by the youth. So here we find that young Africans are generally less likely than their elders to vote in elections. In South Africa, older South Africans have also become less likely to vote over time. And while partisanship has declined in South Africa in recent years, the lack of attachment to a political party is most acute among young citizens. So here we're looking at voting patterns across the 39 countries that we surveyed. And we asked, in the last election, did you vote or not, or were you too young to vote? And the respondents who were too young to vote are excluded from this response. But we find that young people were less likely than elders to vote. So 63% of young people expressed that they voted in their country's last election. This is compared to 78% of those aged 36 to 45 years, 82% of those aged 46 to 55 years, and 84% of those aged 56 years and above. If we zone into the South African context, we find that only about half, 51% of young people say that they voted in the last election in 2019. This is compared to 65% of those aged 36 to 55 years and 77% of those aged 56 years and above. But before we simply write off youth as being apathetic, it's also important to provide some context. What we find is that voter turnout has been declining across age groups in South Africa. So if we look at the graph, we see that between 2011 to 2021, voter turnout has been declining from those aged between 18 to 35 years to those aged 36 to 55 years to those aged 56 years and above. We also ask our respondents whether they feel close to any particular political party. And here we find that young people are less likely than their elders to express that they have a political home. Only about a third of young people say that they feel close to any particular political party. This is compared to 42% of those aged 36 to 55 years and about half of those aged 56 years and above. And what's interesting here is that the data seems to suggest that political parties can no longer rely on party support or party loyalty, for votes, that they actually need to work to earn the votes of South Africans and young people in particular, because young people are less likely to be attached to any particular political party. Here we ask about participation in civic and political activities. So we ask our respondents whether they attended a community meeting in the last year, whether they joined others to raise an issue, whether they attended a demonstration, whether they contacted a local government councillor, contacted a party official, contacted a traditional leader, or contacted a member of parliament. And here we find that young South Africans were less likely than their elders to say that they attended a community meeting, that they joined others to raise an issue, that they contacted a local government councillor, or that they contacted a party official. But in contrast, young South Africans were no less or just as likely, as their elders to say that they attended a demonstration, that they contacted a traditional leader, and that they contacted a member of parliament. And what I should probably also add here is that what our survey findings demonstrate is that South Africans have low trust in institutions. And so that low trust cuts across the board. South Africans demonstrate low trust in the office of the presidency, in the police, in the judiciary, and the list goes on and on. So South Africans are very distrustful of their institutions, but there is some glimmer of hope in that traditional leaders garner more than 50% of the trust of South Africans. And that it could explain why young people and their elders are turning to traditional leaders to voice their dissatisfaction with the system or to request help or whatever it may be. And maybe we can unpack that later. But another group that garners more than 50% of the trust of South Africans is, interestingly, traditional leaders. And so maybe we can unpack those findings as well. To conclude, young Africans rank unemployment as the top priority, needing urgent government attention, and they are dissatisfied with the failure of their governments to create jobs. And while youth are more educated than middle-aged and older citizens, they are also more likely to be unemployed. And in South Africa, it's important to note when we talk about voter turnout, is that this is a phenomenon. Declining voter turnout is a phenomenon that cuts across age groups in this country. And what our findings show is that South Africans are less likely to jump from one political party to another. They would rather just stay away from the polls altogether, which is an interesting phenomenon that the data makes clear. And then lastly, young South Africans engage in some forms of non-electoral politics at similar rates to their elders. But at the same time, survey findings suggest that young people have room to expand their influence in other areas through political and civic engagement. Thank you very much. I look forward to the question and answer session later on.
Thanks so much, Mpako. That's really fascinating. That gives us a lot to think about. Particularly coming off of a major election, of course, which is in some sense thrown up some novelties. Okay, so I'm going to hand straight over to Prof. Mkhize now as the respondent. And meanwhile, please feel free as well, all of you attending, to add in questions online. Okay, Prof. Mkhize, over to you. Just unmute.
I'm becoming an old woman. Let me just, what do you call it, blur or whatever. How do I do that? Settings. How do I do that?
Go to the thing next to your camera. There's a little
The
down button.
video.
Oh, on the video, ne?
Yeah, on the camera. You see the camera? If you press the camera,
Yes.
there will be blare, standard blare.
Oh, video effects, Andy, for many things. Sorry about that. Okay.
Yeah,
I
there's a little.
think I can share or apply. They're always updating these Teams things. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I've sent you the presentation, Prof. Mbata, just as in case my side, but I'm going to, I'm not able to share. Maybe you can share.
Okay, next to the leave button, there is
to the
a
leave
arrow
button.
going. There's an arrow going up.
No. Share doesn't work for me.
doesn't work.
I wasn't given the access. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have it yet on my email.
Okay.
So, but I can give you access. I can give you access by making you a
Okay, sure.
presenter. Just give me a second.
All right,
Already has it.
you can try and share again.
Oh.
Yes, you can
Oh,
try
I
and
can
share.
share now. Yes. Sorry, I just was working on it as I was listening to our main presenter. So apologies for that. I just needed to hear what she was saying. Okay.
No problem.
Thanks. I can't see myself now. What's going on? Okay, now I can see myself.
See you. Okay.
Okay. Is it sharing? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Asafika. I see also in the room, well, we're not in the room, but of those were quite a few of us online. Professor Spokazi Makadla is also in the room, and she will also remember you from that Flanagan interview. And I'm sure also Professor Mabizela, who was also there, will remember you. So it's wonderful to see you again and the work that you're doing, and really that you've come this far. Thank you so much for doing this research. I'd seen Asafika's presentation beforehand, but I wasn't really quite sure how to, so I just waited to see and hear some of the depth. And what's interesting for me is that what she's saying is something that I think a lot of us already know or understand, or that we don't have numbers for, but we can observe in the environment around us. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw some things out so that you also have time for questions with her and see if it helps. I thought about this work in light of some of the concepts or discussions in sociology around social reproduction, which I find a very complicated concept because I'm not really a sociologist, but I just thought maybe this would help me organize my thoughts for today. And in talking about social reproduction, we talk about the activities that nurture future workers, regenerate the current workforce, and maintain those who cannot work. That is the set of tasks that together maintain and reproduce life, both daily and generationally. Social reproduction consists of, broadly speaking, caring for yourself and for others, children, elder care, healthcare, maintaining physical spaces, organizing all the processes, whether it's cleaning, shopping, repairing, species reproduction, all of these tasks which involve staying alive, many of which are, traditionally performed by women. But of course, I think that's a definition that points to a particular time in our industrial history and then the way that industrial sociology perhaps looks at social reproduction. If you look at how in Africa, or in Southern Africa in particular, the industrial base took African men out of home reproduction and placed a burden on women. I think those ideas around how women end up having to do quite a lot of tasks that are unpaid, but they are necessary for reproducing society and capitalism itself. Now, I think we're all aware that at this point, we're finding ourselves with a serious crisis of reproduction. People are finding themselves unable to either support their dependents or themselves unable to support themselves, and they're dependent on others. And so there's kind of a depletion of financial, emotional, mental, and other resources. And in many cases, people are finding that the state itself is not adequately able to provide for them. Now, of course, in South Africa, the state does provide for a large portion of the elderly population, but what the state is doing there is the state is trying to support the elderly. But we all know that that immediately results in that resource pack that goes to an elder gets distributed across the household. So we see that the South African pension, or I don't know what do they call it, social grant system, it's able to sustain a level of social reproduction that, had that not been there, I think there'd be a lot of crisis in South African households. Now, and I think we all have noted that there's a shift towards market exchange much more. So a lot of the tasks that we see are now being commoditized, privatized. There's a greater degree of exploitation and exploitative labor, particularly with the decline in industrialization. Everywhere in South Africa, you will see under any tree a group of men waiting to be picked up, trying to find labor for the day. In Makanda, it's there by a ShopRite. Upper Bayi, it's there just out the robot junction, Ewoma, groups of men waiting to be picked up for hoping for labor for the day. So we've seen this constant sort of precarity growing and growing and growing. Now, in thinking about this, I sort of tried to categorize what society itself sort of looks like at the level of people who are able to be active in this role of social reproduction. So you've got young people, you've got adults between the age of 30 to 45, you've got seniors, that's people like myself, people, sort of 45, people who are sort of at the level of, I'll just call it heavy social responsibility between 45 and 65. You're usually the one who's earning the most now in your family, and you're the one that's going to cover everyone in your family. And then you've got cultural elders and retirees, let's just say people from 65 to over 100, who are people who are supposed to be winding down and playing a different sort of social role. Now, in the past, I think we've always used terms like race, gender, class, income, geography, and age to try and understand the inequalities or the way in which the social systems and the economic systems structure each and every one of these groups and how it cuts across. So women are going to have different experiences than men, et cetera, et cetera. I think more and more what we're finding is that even though all of these categories, race, gender, class, income, geography, age, are helpful, they are increasingly beginning to dissolve and collapse in how we understand what's happening to people. So someone who's between 18 and 30, which is quite a wide range, one of the things we've noticed there is that you cannot easily say that so there's been a subversion of some of the experiences. So for example, in South Africa, at least, young men between age of 18 and 30 are likely to not be in education and training. And girls, let me just use the word girls, older young women or young adults, but I want to say girls, are likely to be more easily captured by structured institutions like universities. So we're seeing a dropout of young men and a retention of young women. So it's not just, so you can no longer simply just say, oh, of course, women are the ones who are going to be institutionally excluded. It's not quite so straightforward. Adults between the age of 30 and 45, there what you're noticing is that where you would have normally seen some kind of divergence in gendered roles and power in the home, you'll see that it's becoming quite messy because people between the age of 30 to 45 are unlikely to be working in our homes. So you'll find that maybe one person works, but other people who are 38, 37, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, unemployed, have never worked, haven't worked, or worked precariously. So even though they should be at the stage at which they are now the socially responsible adult, they have no means by which to do that. So there we start seeing that the concept of who commands a household, the contestation around who's commanding, whether economic power should play a role, whether cultural power should play a role, how those things are understood is becoming more and more messy in Black households broadly, okay? And then at the level of social seniors and cultural retirees, there I think there's a generational dividend that has followed people of that age. So they've banked the gain. So even though they may have suffered under apartheid or high racial discrimination, or I'm so sorry, or undergone a lot of the classical colonial experience, the irony is that it's those elders who've banked the gains of capitalism first. So a younger person who hasn't undergone structured racial discrimination, colonial dispossession, and all those will have less of a social asset base or the ability to acquire any asset base, where the elder who went through all those violences at least was able to bank the little bits that capitalism threw at them at that stage. So these things are becoming strange and upturned. If I can just quickly now move to this. So there's another thing. So in relation to all of this, what we're noticing is under these conditions, and maybe these conditions should be considered, I don't know, maybe Prof. Magada, you can help me, Ms. Mpako, we can think about these things, but I don't want to say there's a fragmentation, but I think sociologists and labor studies people and global anthropologists can see this disintegration of human sort of institutional forms as the current global economy continues. So one of the things I want to point out is that, as I had said earlier, those categories, gender and so forth, have to be rethought. What's happening to who, right? You can't always easily predict. I think probably the most stable predictor of anything there would be if the person is really much older, and then you can probably see you can make more predictions about their outcomes because of how much they've banked. Or if the person belongs particularly to the top, I'd say, as we all say, it's sort of the top 1%. And the top 1% in any society will surprise us. It's never only the super rich, but the top 1%, you can almost predict that, okay, they'll sort of be stable. But in the parts that we can't predict anymore what's going to happen, I've seen that one of the problems is that there's a severe gendered sociology that is unfolding. It's a very severe gendered sociology, and it's a pity that in the humanities, people have less and less understanding of gender than ever before. And that's a debate for another day, but it seems to also be part of the way that capitalism just confuses things around structure and agency. But here's one thing that you can notice. So we know, for example, in South Africa, in many, many universities and in many programs, females are outpacing male students in numbers. Okay, this is the case in my university and in many. It's not obviously even, but it's a fact. If you look at Rhodes, Nelson Mandela, anywhere, you will see that females are outpacing males in numbers. Okay, now you have to look at that and ask yourself, if your university is 60% female and 40% male, where's the 10% of males? Where are they? Okay. Now, I've had to qualify there that even though females are being outpaced, females are outpacing males, they are in terms of Black people, particularly Black colored Indian, you will see that at the level of the professional, at professional level, so at the level at which people are lecturers, etc., men still get kind of the men that are in the system will still get quite of a preference, even if they are being outstripped at the student level. But you'll see that Black men will outpace women at a far higher rate at the professional level, much faster than at the that level of the student. But there are also other complications here, because it has to do with intersecting lines of how affirmative action has worked out in South Africa over the past 30 years, who it's benefited mostly, how and how other sort of professional networks work. But in any case, let's just focus on student numbers, because that's your mass, your social mass. So what we're noticing is that outpacing is a question. That's a question you must ask. Because it's one thing for us, and I think a lot of us are feeling this, one thing to clap and say, oh, wow, girls are catching up. But it's another when you can't answer, where's the 10% of boys? And so we have to begin to be able to look at where's that 10% of boys? And I think we all know the answer. So the answer is really that they're terrorizing us somewhere else. That's the answer. So the conditions are such that, yes, girls are outpacing boys, but what we see is this thing, which I can only call a return to unstructured or privatized or organized violent jobs for men. Okay? Now, I use that word very plainly. I don't want to create like a stereotype where I don't mean the working class men are violent in that way. I mean it in a much more brutalist way, that what you're seeing is the male bodies are captured more and more in spaces that are incredibly chaotic or incredibly violent, or highly structured for particular kinds of power purposes. So it wouldn't be, for example, a surprise to me that the most potent force right now in South Africa politically that was able to reorganize the power relations in the ANC was EMK party. It obviously isn't a surprise. And you can't just look at it and say, oh, it's just, the men, they just, they want to be violent together. There's a range of conditions that's leading to these social forms happening in the way that they do. Okay, so and unstructured violence is, it's a different level. So it's whether young men are being drawn into organized criminality or disorganized criminality or forms thereof. Okay, and then privatized, that's the constant drawing in of young men into dangerous jobs, the security sector, or just disposable labor, where you need a building to be unregulated and then it collapses in Georgia and it's mostly men dying. So, but the counter of that, of course, is that in the home, the domestic sphere, the domestic burden is now being carried by this woman who has to deal with the fact that chances are there's not going to be much employment for the men in her life, whether they're brothers or uncles or whatever. There's going to be a range of sociological consequences to men being drawn into these forms of social forms where there's mostly structured by men and the way that male structure hierarchy operates. And so women are bearing a brunt, which means in South Africa, we kind of haven't seen a shift. We may not have thought there was a shift. Maybe social grants have helped, but we're seeing that the brunt of the domestic burden in South Africa is being borne very heavily by females. I just want to now quickly go to this issue these are just thoughts, and we can think about them in light of what Afrobarometer is saying. So Ms. Mpako spoke about how young Africans are more educated than their elders and less employed. This again is not a surprise if you've been watching any university in this country for the past 15 years. And I just maybe should mention that, let me use two examples if I can think of the second one, but the first one is the one here. In the first example here, in 2014, I can't remember how many years that was, maybe it was about 10 years ago. I wrote an article when I was still at Rhodes, observing the environment and observing the kind of this sort of new discourse around mental health and anxiety that a lot of sort of millennial, what did you call them, Generation Z, a lot of them have. And I really just observed it, and I just used my black lens. I looked at it, and there was so much stress and panic at Rhodes. And I was like, how do people at a very well-off university university have this level of stress and panic, and why there's so much anxiety. And I thought about this a lot, and I wrote an article back then, thinking it would sort of open up a conversation. And I put it down to two things, and I'll only talk about the one, okay, because this is not room to talk about the other. But the one was, I said, young people can already feel that the promise of modern life is a shift.
Sorry, Prof. Mkhize, you froze up.
Oh,
Can you
sorry.
just
Did
repeat
I
the question again?
drop off?
Just go from young people can already feel. That's where it stopped.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry, my network is not that great. That
No
young
problem.
people can feel that this dream that we're selling them, it's not quite there. They play along with it somewhere, but they can sense that this dream isn't going to arise in the way that we're promising them. And I could see this across the university sector amongst Black students who were beginning to come into these institutions from about 2013 thereabouts, okay? And we used to talk about this with some of my colleagues and say, yes, there's something wrong. The students are beginning to, and we looked around and I thought, no. So they were busy having this mental health discourse. I was like, this is not mental health. And of course I came under fire, but whatever. I mean, I was like, whatever. I think time will bear me out. I didn't want to complicate the discussion at the time because I think, it's hard enough to be young, but I didn't want to complicate it. But I needed to say it, that the real situation here is Black students are going into universities and the kind of social ladder that it used to appear to offer is no longer stable. Whereas when I was at university, the ladder was very stable. You came into university and by third year, you knew exactly where you were going to work. But they were not experiencing this in the same way. So they had a much less structured sense of what outside was going to be like. And so they kind of just would then fall into the roads, well, not roads, but the middle class, mental health, whatever. Whereas if we had thought, in the mental health at that time, still I would be like, but it's fine because Unilever's hiring me next year, so I'm going to solve my mental health. You know what I'm saying? But these ones didn't have that, and they didn't know they didn't have it, and it wasn't their fault. And I was a bit upset with I'll say, the dominant white psychology of South Africa and the world for not seeing that this is a youth in structural crisis. They hadn't the tools to interpret it, but we could see it because we're Black. So you can see it because I can see it in my own family. So when I see stress in my family, I can see that my cousin who's going crazy, it's because they can't put enough CVs together to get any job outcome. And it's the same at university. So as time went on, I think this thing actually bore itself out more and more with many of our graduates across the sector, not just, in one institution, but across the sector, finding themselves staying longer and longer and longer and longer at university and delaying independent adulthood. And that being a very frustrating thing, but them not knowing that frustration is unnatural. It's got nothing to do with whether you're mentally well or not. It's got to do with you can see that you're not becoming an independent adult. So those things were some of the things that, let me just see if I can find the rest of the presentation, that I was trying to reflect on at the time. So I began to want to really talk about the fact that actually, so I'm just focusing in on the sector as part of thinking about that finding. That is no surprise that you're more educated, but you're not getting the jobs. That higher education, in fact, has never been a linear path of employment for former colonies or formerly colonized, former colonized societies. That what education has always done is that it's acted as a social filter. So educated has always filtered an elite and chosen them for placement in the economy on the basis of whether you look civilized. These days, it's whether your accent sounds right, who is a Christian, what are your attributes that we think, and so education has always had that distorted element for most colonized societies. Technical training, on the other hand, has always had a much, I think, better predictor of whether someone has a stable skill set which they can deploy anyway in the economy. You see, the educated strata, the ones that we are, is always going to be forced to go into one sort of realm, right? Even though it's higher paid, it's only one way, but the technical realm allows for a bit of economic mobility and maneuverability. But the problem with technical education, and it's been the problem since W.E.B. Du Bois pointed it out, and in all the debates around Lovedale, for over 150 years, Africans have been debating technical training. The main struggle with technical training for us was that it lacked the intellectual discourse necessary for society. So you can get your training, but you can't debate its class structure. So you can become a plumber, but you're not allowed in plumbing to go and debate why there's a racial hierarchy. You see, so those two separations in South Africa between one domain that does enable greater debate, and that's why you have more protest in universities everywhere in the world, versus the domain that has a more stable predictor for your mobility. Whether you lose a job in South Africa, maybe you can go to Finland, who knows, with your boilermaker skills or whatever, but the mobility of the skills training at the mass level is almost more predictable, but it just lacks the true sort of ideological role that education and normative role that education needs to play. Then the last thing is that the last one, oh, last, last. The last thing that I must then just throw out there for everyone to think about is how young people are responding, not just young people, but the confluences of people in South African society that are beyond Twitter, but also there, around how to respond to this world, where it's clear that your prospects are getting less and less, less and less predictable. The problem is predictability for people, less and less predictable. And by the way, I must say this, and I really need to say it because it's true. The less predictable the path for a man, the more social chaos you're going to breed. The less predictable the path for a boy, the more you're going to find society in absolute sort of crisis, because they will go into disorganized forms of or highly structured forms of violent labor. Now, what we noticed when Isilo Uzwelthinga Bhekuzulu died was a huge response across the country for people saying, but is this who we are? Why aren't we told these things? That's specific to South Africa, this yearning for cultural education and so forth. But I looked at that thing and I said, you know what? People are not just asking for cultural education here. People are saying we need an antidote to this lack of structure in South Africa, this lack of path, this lack of direction. And one of the things there is looking at how cultural institutions actually organize life. And so it's not a surprise that then you get, you know, political parties where you see the merging of both ideology in the sense of a high sort of, let's say with MK, a very structured sort of Marxist outlook, which is very common in KZN, regardless of what people say. It's a very Marxist kind of politics in grassroots KZN that we have. But there's this yearning for social order that reflects something other than these capitalist values and has some other kind of normative structure. And I think it's both that there's a unpredictability of the current order, the capitalism we have, but also I think it's because in South Africa there's been a downplaying of that. And that's because I think the technocratic model, the model that says, hey, you know that graduates in South Africa are highly likely to be employed? And we look and we say, no, it's not true. And then the economists tell you, yes, it is. We did the regression analysis. And then you say, no, it's not true because we're suffering at home. All the graduates are underemployed and unemployed. Where are you getting your data from? Your data is not making sense, you know, in terms of how the Treasury has actually looked at how much to invest in higher education. So people start losing faith in technocracy because technocracy doesn't answer real dynamism of society. And so cultural institutions become much better for people to use. And so in that sense, I think let me stop there and then maybe just give room for questions.
Thank you so much. Do you want to say something, Prof, about it? Or should I go?
No, thank you. Yeah, unless you're open to start questions. So in that, yeah.
Okay.
You can lead me, yeah.
All right, well, let's start with questions. Okay, so there are already some in the chat box. Let me just see if there's anybody in the room who wants to go. Okay, I see a hand, so yeah, go ahead. Just make sure we can hear you, and you have to unmute in the room.
Yeah, I'll shout over the laptop. Hi, I'm Anna. I'm very curious to know what the role of universities are in building more political and civic engagement, not just of students, but also of staff. So that's my question.
Thanks, Anna. While we're at it, let's maybe just see if there's anybody else in the room who wants to add anything before we get the... Okay, yeah, there's another hand.
So I want to, is it necessary for me to come in? Okay, sure. My question concerns, so the data that we was read out to us and the youth participation in politics. So I'm wondering whether there is a case to be made with regards to a distinction between people's way of life and then the roles they are expected to play in the politics. So how, given that I've been raised in a certain culture and in certain ways of perceiving justice, and then the difference that is going to exist once I move out and come to Rhodes University and then learn another perspective on how to address things. Yeah, I just wonder if there is a case to be made with regards to that and the participation of people in political discourse. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, anybody want to add in the room?
Yes, there's also another
Yes, one more. Maybe for Ms. Mpako, the issue of over 30% of the youth not looking for work, and most of this 30% being comprised of university students. Why are these people in school if they understand that there's a structural crisis and that there's no longer any predictability that because you are qualified in this and that, you will automatically be employed in that field. And why are they continuing to pursue higher education if they are not going to be actively seeking out work, whether in those fields that they're studying for or not? And then for Prof. Mkhize, I just would like to understand why the crisis is larger for men than it is for women, that the prospects are less predictable. So why is this something that is going to be more hard-hitting for males rather than females?
Okay, thanks so much. So let's take the three questions. Obviously, both Ms. Mpako and Prof. Mkhize can weigh in on both things, even if not directly addressed to them. But let's start with Ms. Mpako. Unmute, please.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Okay,
Thanks,
okay.
Sam. And thanks, everyone, for the questions. I'll start with the question around why it is that young people continue to enroll at university when the prospects don't look all that rosy. I think my answer is going to lean into what a bit of what Prof. Mkhize said. I do believe that there is a disillusionment, or young people do feel that, as Prof. Mkhize said, the ladder to success isn't as stable. But even with that knowledge, young people also realize that there aren't as many avenues to take that are sturdy. So there isn't a path really that guarantees you a particular outcome. As things stand, I think that particularly for Black students in this country, education looks like the surest route. And our parents tell us that that you need to go to school, you need to study, because what prospects will you have in the world without an education, without a matric, without a bachelor's degree? And even when you look at job advertisements, most of them require, at minimum, a bachelor's degree, an honors degree. So I think that young people carry within them some degree of hope still, that if I do go to school, I might be one of the lucky ones. Because outside of that, what other route is there that I can take that guarantees me somewhat of an outcome that is desirable to me, right? So people talk a lot now about content creation and the possibilities that exist for young people in that space. But even that is not a guarantee for anyone. Some people become TikTok famous, Instagram famous, and they make a lot of money off of those platforms, but that isn't a surefire route either. So I think as things stand, it's a 50-50 chance, and young people take their gamble. And right now, I think that young people are saying, this still looks like a better route than all of the others when you compare them against one another. So I think that's why young people still choose to go to university. And I think that also because our parents come from a generation where university was the way to go, that also has an influence on how young people choose to structure their lives and decide on which route to take. I'll also respond to the first question about how people are expected to respond in relation to this democracy that we have. I think that amongst young people, at least my own sense is that there is somewhat of a disillusionment with formal political processes. I think that young South Africans are politically aware and politically engaged in communities that they have constructed, right? But I think that because there is an expectation that you should participate in these formal structures that have been set up, young people are seen then to be apathetic when they don't participate at rates that are desirable in those formal political processes. So I think that young people are creating spaces of meaning for themselves. And I also think that it has to do a great deal with where young people think, one, that they can find meaning, but also where they think that they will be heard. I talked earlier about the lack of trust in political institutions, the lack of trust in elected leaders. So because of low trust, young people don't believe that going to those elected leaders to express their grievances will change anything. And so I think that they are starting to create their own places of meaning where they can congregate and express themselves and find community outside of formal political processes. So that would be my response to your question. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Okay, Prof. Mkhize, would you like to go ahead as well?
Okay, I think, yes, I think in terms of this discussion, I really think thanks, ISER, we really need to be much more. So I like that we, Asafika's bringing the data, which sounds much more, it sort of describes what I think we're experiencing. And then we're having sort of the qualitative discussion around it, because there's so much to try to understand. And I'm not sure why a lot of it is obfuscated in academic discussion. I don't know why so much that seems so patently obvious about the current social crisis, not just in South Africa, but globally. It's just so complicated because so much academic discourse is almost disincentivized to tell obvious truths, you know? So I think Sam will remember when Julian Cobbing used to lecture us that he was just like, well, modern people have a fascistic mindset. They don't want to acknowledge. They don't want to think. And I took that very seriously when he said it back then. So one of the things about building civic forms of engagement in the university is to actually find a way to expose the fascistic mindset of the professional classes, of the so-called intellectual classes, and not in a judgmental way. We're all implicated in a system. We can't do anything about it. But if we want to be able to really see its underpinnings and its complexities, then the professional classes in the universities need more than sloganeering, or the ones we are in the universities, so the academics in particular, you know, more than just, you know, there's a lot of deep thought you have to give to things sometimes then as you try to make sense of them. But I think academics are under pressure because we have to publish, we have to do all these things just to survive and pay our own school fees. And so it's becoming less and less easy to teach plain truths to the young that come through. And so if you're going to build forms of social or civic engagement in universities, you kind of have to first deal with the university as it stands today across the board, as a de-intellectualization tool in and of itself. I think that can be a very long debate, but I do not believe, I will stand on this till I die, that you should be throwing slogans at young people and simply expecting them to take them because they sound progressive. So the idea that you're just going to throw Black Lives Matter at your students just because we know Black Lives Matter, and then you don't allow them to really unpack what's going on in the social crisis. You just, you know, it's like this reactive, the new activisms, except the latest one on Palestine. I must say the latest one, yeah, it reminds me of deep thought, you know, but this, like, I think what do they call it? They call it virtue signaling type of strange behavior that happens in universities these days. That's a substitute for deep thought. And Cobbing had a book about this. Sorry, now I'm seeing Sam and Cyril. So we were all in Cobbing's classes.
The one that he just published?
No, not just his. On our book list.
Oh, I see.
It was about the modern mind as a fascistic, I can't remember what it was, but there was a book where he was like, you guys are all, what's the word, conformists. You're all conformists. And there you are thinking, yeah, you are all conformists here. And then he would unpack this for us. So the modern university is an incredibly strange animal. And the contemporary university, not the modern, the contemporary university. So be very careful what you think you're doing. I'll give you an example of sloganeering that I did not agree with. 10 years ago, Fanon was all the rage in these universities. Everything was Fanonian. And I was just like, what the hell is this? What is this? It makes no sense. What is it plugging to? And there was this concerted attempt by certain academics to bring Fanon into life and make students have this Fanonian politics. I was just like, this is just rubbish. This has nothing to do with what's happening in my house right now, where I am a breadwinner to 15 people, okay? So nothing to do with Dr. Magadla's house, who's a breadwinner to 30 people, okay? What's that got to do with anything? I can't connect what my colleagues are doing at the time with the social crisis I'm living with. And I was just like, what's this? So the fact that all that Fanonian politics is gone actually shows that it was complete mirage. So be very careful what you mean by that. You can never lose your ability to think critically in a university as you are turning to look at social crisis. And as I think Asafika was saying, young people form these communities, and those communities are the regeneration of social mobilization. Because it's true, when you're older, you've got no time because you're taking care of everyone. When you're younger, it's almost like a social duty you have to create those spaces and mobilize and use the university as that point at which you've got enough power and voice, but you don't have to be so scared that society, I mean, yes, society does kill and crush students, but there's also room for collectives of students to work. But when they do that, then it must be with a lot of critical thinking. I think that's all I'm going to say for now, so I don't get myself into trouble. But so with that in mind, therefore, that thing of other social perspectives, where I'm coming from, I arrive at Rhodes and I have a different social perspective. That's the perspective that needs to find room in the contemporary university and needs to be brought into the critical discussion and needs to be a part of the whatever we do at university. But if you don't bring yourself authentically into a university space, then you can't say, but guys, at least all of my nephews who are born in the year 2000, between 2000 and 2010, all of them are drug addicts. Every single one of them, all my male, well, that's what a nephew is. Every single one of the kids that were raised or that were born from my cousins, all of whom had HIV/AIDS. We are the HIV/AIDS last generation proper. Every single one of their kids who are 2021, they are abang amapara, and they all if they're dead, if they're not on the street somewhere, they're all on drugs somewhere, or they're dead. So, and those are people under the age of 25 in my family. I can count all of them. Bonk. So I have to bring that into the space and say, but why? What's happening? Why am I being terrorized by my nephews? Why am I being terrorized by nephews? If I don't have the tools to engage that and look it square in the face and answer it and really unpack it, and because he's my nephew, I can't just say toxic masculinity. It's really not enough. I can't just be like, okay, he's like toxic masculinity. Well, how's that going to solve my problems in any case? I still have to live with this person.
Yeah.
I still have to live with this. I have to raise this boy. So that then leads to the next question about why is the crisis, why does it have certain outcomes in terms of men and women, or males and females? I would just say that, because I think, sorry, Asafika, you answered the question about why young people pursue higher education in any case. I think that's clear. And I think one of the reasons, and everything you said is exactly that. And one of the reasons is higher education is still one of the few spaces where your chances of in the lottery of jobs is higher, because society has just shifted the filter upwards. So you want to be a call center agent, you need an honors degree. To be a call center agent in my time, you didn't need an education, just needed to be able to speak and be trainable on the job. Now you need an honors, okay? To get into a call center, you need an honors degree. I hope people understand that that's the job we're talking about. So in terms of then hoping that I'll start at the call center and I'll land up in my dream job, this hope is still there. We still have that hope. And that's why young people are still agitating through political movements, because they want the government to make it possible. So, and the other thing is the university or tertiary in South Africa still has a care. If you come to university, we'll have to feed you, we'll have to find you a place to sleep. You can at least spend 3 or 4 years of your life not worrying about where to pay rent. At least, even if you're a small number, but at least if you're in university and you just have to strike and say we're hungry, we'll solve the problem. So that's why higher education has become a social institution. Then, so on the issue of men and women, I think if I could just end there, because I think I'm taking up too much time, but that is a very typical human pattern. That's got nothing to do with anything but if you were a Martian and you looked from outer space and you checked out this species called Homo sapiens sapiens and you compared them to other primates and you look at the social formations and you look at the way in which there are certain tendencies. The tendencies are not bifurcated. They're just tilted more either one side or the other in terms of certain things. When young men go through puberty, they are more likely by the age of 15, when they undergo that stage, to choose peer groups, which if those peer groups are not institutionalized, those peer groups are going to be self-formed, and it's either they're doing comics or they're doing gangs. It's either they're doing cycling club or they're doing Asambe Soropa. They're doing something that is peer group orientated, and you can answer your own question. If you meet a 15-year-old boy, taller than you, stronger than you on the streets, what are you going to do if he starts saying, give me your phone? You can't do anything about it. It's purely embedded in the way in which male social, biosocial standing operates. Men can take from you. You can't take from men if you're female. And so men organize themselves literally at the baseline on the basis of their physical power. And that's why construction mafias, what do you think a construction mafia is? It's our uncles using the muscle to go and say, we'll kill you if you don't give us 30% of this project. Try to do that as a woman. Organize women, see if you can stop a bunch of men to give you 30% of a project. You can't. So it does not help when the social theory around gender in universities is more and more around the fantasies of Western people. Because you know that when Beyonce came here for a concert, when that concert ended and everyone went out of Soweto, at FNB Stadium, is it in Soweto, I think, it was 15-year-old boys that terrorized people throughout the night. It wasn't 15-year-old girls. And you can try to do this whole gender equality thing of saying, oh, but you know, girls also have gangs. Hey, you're afraid of a 15-year-old boy. He's taller, he's stronger, he's faster, he's more dynamic, and if he's of a certain spectrum, he's more wired to take risks than you. Now, you can want to deny that, except I know you can't when you see that 15-year-old boy asking for your phone. So those biosocial realities play out a certain way when the society's social structures fail to form certain modes of socialization and growth, when the economies create vacuums for male organizing, and when there's also more and more forms of masculinity that are about aggression and all kinds of other pathological behaviors, then men teach each other these things. If you want to get through this, is how we do it. This is how we do it. And you cannot stop it if you can't be honest about it. You cannot stop it if you want to pretend it's not real. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. That's great. I see Prof. Mbata. You want to come in?
Yes, we are now online. So I think I will probably just ask if our speaker is able to take at least some of the concepts and the discussion points that we've been having and maybe include them in how they put together the design. I mean, there's lots of, I think from us, I'm just hearing more and more. We are sort of like yearning to figure out what the youth are thinking about how their lives could be more meaningful. And I think that idea that it's just that lack of meaning that's been taken away by the lack of jobs, lack of employment, lack of opportunities. On the other hand, you also don't have this traditional structure that provides that social identity. So it would be interesting, if the survey could start including more and more those types of questions that are asking young people specifically, what do they aspire to in the face of the problems, the challenges that they are faced with? And then maybe start seeing from there, what does that mean and how we could work around it in providing more stability. I think, that's my comment / question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So that was the first question that you put on the chat as well, right?
Yes, so I'm just summing up everything now into one
Okay.
question because it's a big discussion there.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you.
Then I think let's just take it as that. Let's not take more because that's quite a lot. And just put that straight to Mr. Mpako.
Yes, that's all. Yeah.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Prof, for the question. Yeah, our questionnaire is quite extensive, and we're really interested in Africans' evaluations of their current circumstances and also their priorities for government action. But I've noted everything you've said, and I should also just add that though we have a standard questionnaire that we use for every round of our surveys, for every country, we also include a section on what we call country-specific questions. So on any emerging topics or topics of particular interest in that moment, we allow the particular country to draw up a set of questions on those topics of interest to the general public. And so we do allow for that in our questionnaire, and we engage with various stakeholders, including academics, CSO leaders, a range of stakeholders to decide on what is most pressing for citizens. What do they want to know? What do they want to evaluate? And then we include that in the questionnaire. So perhaps we could also take this offline and see what we can do to enhance our, in particular, our South African questionnaire as we go into field later in the year.
Okay. And sorry, can I follow up, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Do you also have like a youth-specific survey that's just focused on youth, or is it all citizens and then there are sections in the questionnaire?
So in our round 10 survey, which we're currently running right now, we do have a youth module that is focused specifically on youth. So the priorities of youth, again, political and civic engagement. We look at all manner of questions, including migration. You'll know that we talk a lot about brain drain on the continent and the lack of economic opportunity, perhaps encouraging youth to look outside of the continent. And what does that mean for us as a continent when youth are looking outside and perhaps succeeding in their missions to move from here? So we're looking at all of that, and we'll be disseminating on that data very soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Okay, so I'm going to go through the questions, and Prof. Mpako had another one as well. So I'm going to read it out unless you want to come in on it, Prof. Mpako. But
maybe Prof. Mpako needs to comment. I saw she wrote a couple of comments because I've been given space already.
Okay.
But I can come in later, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we can come back to them. Okay, then, yeah. Would you like to come in directly, Prof. Mpako, or should I just read? Okay, I'll read the first.
Hi, Sam. Hi, sorry, I couldn't find the microphone.
Okay, cool, yes.
It wasn't really questions. It was just an appreciation of the conversation and just what it made me think about. You know, one of the things that Prof. Mkhize, you know, was pointing out about the disappearance of young men at universities, and this is something she's said at various platforms. I mean, I remember saying to her, a colleague of mine did an analysis of our first year results. This was now 2022, and one of the things, the conclusions she reached was a gender problem around the disappearance of young men. So what we picked up is that the students are coming in really at the same level in terms of marks, girls and boys, but the girls just take off, you know, and this includes the differences between colored young men and women. You know, the colored young women just take off, and we're beginning to see that even at the postgraduate level. I mean, now we had a discussion of our masters and PhDs, and only one, I think out of about 9 MAs was a young man. It was the same last year. Out of 10, it was one young man. So it is absolutely something that I think a lot about, you know, where are these young men going? And if I look at my own environment, home environment, I know that a lot of them are either not working or working in unstable jobs, and how that plays it out, how that plays itself out in family structures. And the reason I was making this point around what do have to think
So-
about. And I'm glad that Iseto is in the room, because I was asking this to the students and what it means, you know, this idea of catching the bag. What does it mean for a sense of deep hopelessness, which all of us can see, which is across this continent? How does that sit with this, what seems to be a hyper fixation with opulence? So it's no longer, so while young people of my generation, maybe we could, we could know that we would probably get a job. The idea was to get some apartment somewhere, maybe a car, but I think the stakes are higher these days. It's not just to be able to fly, it's to actually have a private jet, it's to go to Dubai. So what does this do to young people's psyche, the structural hopelessness that sits side by side with this idea that opulence actually is achievable, when we know empirically that the distance, social mobility is even harder. Even just reaching the middle class is something that is not going to happen for the majority of young people. So maybe let me just stop there.
Thank you. Prof. Mbata, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah. That's so violent, you know. It's like we know that something is not achievable. Just like middle class life, you know, just getting a job, getting an apartment is so difficult, if not impossible for many young people. And now there's the idea that is online where opulence is the aspiration. And when the realization comes that this is never going to happen, you can imagine how young people would turn into drugs, to violence. Yeah, but you know, I would like, you know, most surveys are very descriptive in terms of the patterns that we are observing. You know, if we're talking about migration, we can see patterns on who is moving into what location. But I'm always interested into the push and pull factors that explain these migration patterns that are being observed by the data. You know, whether, for example, somebody is moving towards a job because they found a job, applied for it, and they went there and got employed, or they were just pushed from out of their current environment by a situation that was impossible and unbearable, and then they just moved without any hope, any confidence that they would get a job in Johannesburg. So those are important also to distinguish, you know. I mean, it could be two people moving from the same location. One has got a job, one is just being pushed by poverty. On paper, it could look the same, you know, but depending on what kind of questions we ask them, then we can realize and start figuring out what the nuances are. But not only that, what is it? What are the aspirations? Because you know, I always say to my colleagues that I sometimes feel like I'm in a different country, although I'm still in South Africa, because things are so different, you know. From my generation, my understanding of things is so different. You know, what I could have predicted is happening amongst the youth is probably very, very off the mark, looking at the behavior right now. So it's these youth-specific surveys are important, and discussions from them. Maybe also to include workshops to discuss, present the results to young people and let them interpret what the patterns are, and then report those. Their own interpretation of the data in reports would also be useful for us to figure out really what is their universe. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our time is running a bit short, but I'm going to, before taking it back to the speaker and respondent, I see Resha also has a question. So Resha, if you want to ask as well, and then I'll turn it around to the speaker and respondent.
Yes, perfect. Thanks, Sam. And Asafika, it's good to see you again. Thank you so much for doing this lovely presentation for us. I just wanted to ask about, of course, like unemployment is on everyone's mind and was a large part of the presentation. So we saw from the data that there are high levels of unemployment and, of course, youth unemployment within the African continent, sorry. And then we also saw that there, and there was a large discussion on it earlier about how young people are still going to university because well, firstly, because what else? And then the various discussions that ensued around that. So my question is, in South Africa, we know that a part of the unemployment is explained by this mismatch between education and the skills needed in the employment sector, right? So, for example, people may be studying to become Boilermakers or something, but people actually the employment sector actually needs more teachers. So is this a common finding across the other African countries that you guys survey, or is it something that is specific to South Africa? I know that the questionnaire may not necessarily dig into this question or this mismatch particularly, but like just your general sense from like, visiting the data and like chatting with I mean, and exploring the findings in other countries. Like, is this a common thing to like the various African countries, or is it just specific to South Africa? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Risha. Okay, so we're going to start wrapping up in about 5 or so minutes, but let's now take those comments, questions next together. And first, Prof. Mkhize, would you like to just weigh in on those?
I mean, I think I was also going to ask a question.
Okay, yes.
So I will. I will try and see if I can formulate it, and then Asafika can sort of, when she wraps up the whole thing. I don't know how to ask the question. First, let me just make the comment about the. I think maybe I should say this so that I don't leave a vacuum. The crisis that of so-called male disappearance in various institutions becomes a crisis, a much more intense crisis for women. I'm just thinking of the way the question was phrased, as if I'm saying men are having suffering more. There's equal suffering, or whatever you want to call it. Everyone's suffering. But the type of suffering that women are going through is that they are literally dying of stress and hypertension and strokes and so forth. Or if they're not dying, they are just sort of dealing with massive chronic disease burden from having to be burdened. So the reason why it's important to be very clear about what's going on is because the brunt of the social reproduction, trying to keep I don't want to say the family. You see the problem with English, but trying to keep whatever it is we live in going, the brunt falls a lot on women, and they are paying hugely for it. And I don't want anyone to think when we're speaking about this that we are trying to garner. You know what I'm saying? It's the women who are dying. We're speaking because we're dying. So I hope you understand that that's why we have to answer that, solve for that problem. So related to that question is, I think I was trying to work through, maybe, I don't know, anyone in the room thinking about it as well, and maybe Asafika, is what are the questions that young people are asking themselves when there are no audiences? So what's in the head of someone looking around and saying, this is a mess, and this is a mess that's falling on young people more and more? I'm trying to get the sense of what's the what really comes out of young people right now? Like, because it's what, okay, sure, there's no employment, or there's a struggle for employment and all those things, but I often can't get to the heart of what young people are really asking when they are most vexed about the current structural crisis. And I was wondering if also so this kind of studies that are done, like the Afrobarometer surveying and the rest of it, how does it ask its questions, and how do we get from asking the sort of, okay, age, gender, class questions into different kinds of questions, like health outcomes of the situation, psychological outcomes of the situation, happiness outcomes. I don't know if anyone ever asked Africans how we maintain being human. So the more human questions, how, Asafika, are those being posed? That's just what I was wondering, because it's like, I know data is important, but it's not answering the misery of the Black woman right now who's in a social crisis in her home. Everyone's on drugs, everyone's on alcohol, and she must still come home and sort something out, and she's got chronic diseases, and she's dropping off a stroke at 48.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think this is something that keeps coming up, is this relationship between the descriptive and the more explanatory stuff. And that's been so interesting to see you both in dialogue. Would you like to answer those and just give any final thoughts you might have, Ms. Mpako?
Thank you, Sam, and thanks, Prof. Yeah, that's a big question. I stated earlier that our survey questionnaire is very extensive, and really we're interested in the material circumstances of Africans' lives. So as yet, we haven't got to the questions that you pose, Prof. And they're important questions. And I think that what we often say at Afrobarometer is that we provide a snapshot of how Africans are feeling about how their governments are performing, about the quality of their lives. But our data is useful to give that picture, but it also should be supported by other research that digs deeper and asks the questions that we're unable to ask. And that's part of the reason why we have these engagements with academics such as yourself, with CSO leaders who are plugged into communities at the grassroots level. They also help us to unpack these findings and understand better what it is that Africans are grappling with. And what I should mention, which is very interesting and has come through strongly when we have our interviews across the continent, is our questionnaire is very long. I've said this many times, but what's interesting is that Africans are really interested in talking to our interviewers about what is going on in their lives. And many times our interviewers have to stop them and say, oh, hold on, I just needed this particular information. But it's because Africans are not used to people being interested in hearing their voices. They have become so neglected by their governments that anyone who wants to hear what they have to say and is interested in what's going on in their lives, that's really something special to them. And I think that what our data makes clear, especially in the area of most important problems, is just how dissatisfied African citizens are, not just the youth, but Africans across age groups, with what their lives have become. And they're crying out to their governments to say, intervene, because we are struggling in the areas that we've pointed out. And it seems that governments have become so far removed from the people that they really don't appear to be interested in listening and in understanding and in, most importantly, solving for these problems. So that's what we've come to see in our data, is that Africans are really crying out for a listening ear and for these problems to be solved. And then Risha, good to hear your voice. You're right, we don't ask that particular question about the mismatch of skills. But what I think in South Africa, and this is my own sense, we're missing is more private sector involvement in this conversation around unemployment and how we solve for it. How do we devise solutions that integrate business into helping to solve for this crisis? Because seemingly we, as Prof pointed out earlier, now if you're even applying to become for a job as a packer at a grocery store, you have to have a matric. There needs to be conversations between government, between civil society leaders, between leaders across the spectrum around how this issue should be solved. I don't think that it can be solved by just government alone. As is often said, we need a multi-sectoral approach. And I think that in a lot of cases, business has just been allowed a free pass. And yet they also should have a stake in making sure that the society remains stable. And if you have a huge demographic of young people who exist on the periphery of the society and are marginalized and have no stake in protecting this country and in protecting their communities, then we have a huge problem on our hands. And so business does need to get involved more significantly in this conversation. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Prof. Mbata. Okay, you don't want to come in. Okay, you're muted, by the way. Okay, that's fine. And let's wrap up. So yeah, there's another comment from Riyashit to Prof. Mkhize in the chat, but we're going to have to leave it there. And there's some other comments, but we don't have time to take them, unfortunately. So all I'd like to say is just a very deep word of gratitude to both speaker and the respondent, but also to everybody who came. It's really appreciated, and the conversation has been absolutely fantastic. I hope these conversations carry on over time as well. So I'm going to leave it there. Just to everybody who has attended, I'd like to know that you can follow our social media channels. It's at Rhodes ISER, one word. I'll put it in the chat as well. And then the recording of this is also going to be made available on YouTube. So we leave it there. Have a great afternoon and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Prof, you muted.
Oh, I'm muted. Okay. So now I can, I think I can stop recording. Thank you, guys. Thank you. That was well done. Mzu, well done, well done, well done. You
Thank
see,
you.
you are so good when you are in charge. So next